Hey, welcome everybody. Hi from Indianapolis, Indiana. Indiana, I mean, home to so many legends and wonderful people. It's unbelievable. I mean, we've got presidents, vice presidents, we've got basketball players, but most importantly, Indiana is home to the Indy 500, and that's coming up soon. And so I know there's a lot of people camping out heading to the racetrack even this weekend. So if you're coming in from out of town, or if you're thinking, hey, I've never been to the 500 or it's been a while, come back and join us. So Keith, you're not in Indianapolis today. Where are you?
I'm in Charlotte today, and I am here for a similar thing. We are hitting the Darlington Motor Speedway this weekend for a NASCAR race.
Okay. Now, what made you want to do that?
Young Caleb gets married a month from yesterday, and I needed some hang time with him before we kind of separated our current roles in the world. And so we've been on a road trip. We had dinner with some clients here in Charlotte last night. We ran across some friends yesterday morning. We've just had a really good road trip so far.
That's cool. I'm going to throw the disclaimer up here. Stay behind the fence today, Keith. We talked about that last week for the Kentucky Derby, and probably good advice for a racetrack or anywhere else. But with that in mind, these disclaimers are up here. Mainly, they're motivated to just share what we're talking about. And so we're going to talk about the S&P 500. We're going to talk about the small cap index. We're going to talk about the NASDAQ. And I was reminded of the importance of getting out there and doing some risk taking this morning. I was at the Starbucks near our house and stopped in and saw a mother and daughter talking. And boy, my heart just really went out to this mom. She was trying to encourage her daughter to get out of her room, get out of the house. And there's just so much to see, so much to do. For many of these kids, COVID locked them up where they were able to hide out behind a screen or hang out in their room and just didn't get the opportunity to get out there and enjoy life. And so I'm glad that you're getting out there and enjoying life, Keith. And I've got a lot to talk about today, but what were you thinking? What was on your mind?
I always have interesting things on my mind, I think, and that may just be me, but the reality of risk and reward are out there. And I was looking at some research from the Capital Research Group. Also, some of you know them as the American Funds. And they said in this publication they have is that uncertainty has a name. They called the name inflation, but really that's uncertainty's name is risk. It's an uncertain outcome is what risk is. And inflation is a risk in this particular market that is reality. And I was having a conversation with a friend last night, basically saying a challenge of maturing is understanding the math of inflation in your own head. You know, when you're 25, a house might have cost X dollars, and when you're 50, it might have been X plus something. But as you get older, there's a tendency to forget that that price just keeps going up. And it's almost like learning a new language of the pricing of things, particularly in faster inflationary times like we're in right now, where things are going up in price 6-7% even year over year.
If you've had Keith or I do a financial plan for you, it starts off with a list of assumptions. And those assumptions come from listening to you. And then we move into some recommendations. And one of the things, if your financial plan or your suggestion summary has is one of the earlier ones, we said we're going to assume that inflation will be right around 3%. And so therefore, you're going to see the cost of stuff double every 24 years. And that's what you're talking about, right, Keith? Just the power that, things are going to increase over time. And I think it's easy to get stuck into a mind trap where, if you're an employer, you might think, well, how much money am I making? How much money am I paying out? And it's easy to get into a mind trap of, well, I didn't do that years ago, or I haven't bought a car in a while. How much does a car cost? Well, it used to cost this. Well, it just doesn't anymore. And so maybe 24 years has passed since the last time you dusted off your financial recommendation sheet, and it's time to take a look at that again.
Yeah, I'm looking up on Zillow, Doug, just while you can keep talking. I was going to give you an example of inflation and in my own experience too, because it's really it makes it sometimes it can lock you up if you're not really acclimated to what the current realities are in your world with the cost of such. But that's kind of what I'm checking out now as you go on to your next topic. Zillow is pulling up stuff, but not exactly where I'm at right now.
Well, while you're talking, I thought we had hit head on the topic that I know a couple of folks have reached out to me on this week, and maybe you've had people reaching out to you too, Keith. But the debt ceiling has been the topic, and so I've received a few emails wondering what our opinion is on the debt ceiling and what this looks like for investors, and how will we protect money. And it seems that these topics of um, fear really come into play during election cycles and during political events. And so here we are. In my mind, when I started to think about this, I went back in time to one of the most difficult stock markets that I've been a part of, which was 2011. And in 2011, you might remember there was talk of the debt ceiling, and we were spending money like crazy coming out of 2008, 2009. And if we began to take a look at, oh, what what are we going to do if we have to shut things down? And I think the biggest thing on my plate was I was going to a Notre Dame football game, and they weren't going to do a flyover. So I don't know how much money they saved by not flying jets over stadiums. Maybe, I mean, you got to cut somewhere, but I thought that was pretty interesting. So I hopped on our old friend's information collector, Chat GPT, and went back in time, and it looks like way back in 2011, the Congress at that time issued a new act called the Budget Control Act. And the Budget Control Act was passed in 2011 to kind of put a Band-Aid on spending, and it was to kick into gear in 2013. And so we've been here before. We've had these types of things happen before. And despite no flyovers, the Budget Control Act, the intention of it was to reduce spending over a 10-year period, and their goal was to reduce the deficit by $1.2 trillion over 10 years. And I tried to find out if they accomplished that goal. I didn't quite see it. And so, that could be because, tax rates, go up, and more revenues come in, and politicians find creative ways to spend money. Maybe that's it. But I did see where in 2014, the government spent 3.5 trillion and reduced it. They reduced their spending by 85 billion. So that's a 2.5% spending reduction. If you're making $5,000 a month, that's like saving 125 bucks. And so, it's interesting. We just can't put a lot of hope in our politicians. They find creative ways to spend your money. They are excellent at doing that.
Are you familiar with the Greenbrier Hotel in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia?
Unfortunately not. I've heard the name, but I've never been there.
I made a pass through on our journey this week to that hotel. Beneath one of the areas of the hotel is a bunker. It's not a bunker, it's a fallout shelter that who knows how much money our federal government spent on it, but it is a place for the Congress to convene with a nuclear attack was operational from 1962 to 1992. And they would, I'm going from memory here, they would have fresh meat and probably produce regularly available for that over those 30 years. And the tour guide said they didn't waste any of it, but just imagine
Yeah.
30 years of having fresh meat and produce along with all the meals ready to eat that are stockpiled there for hundreds of people. And the way that this top secret place became known was a couple federal employees finally got fed up with the waste. That was 30 years of that. They got fed up with the waste. They reported it to a reporter who did some investigation and tracked down this thing. And that was for Congress. And you'd have to believe there was one for the executive branch and the judicial branch. And the amount of waste on that is unbelievable. And you could rationalize it very easily. It's like, we want to protect our congressmen and congresswomen, but that's just symptomatic of how easy it is to spend somebody else's money. And that's a very inflationary kind of thing as well. So our government is fine-tuned at it, but they're not really skilled at, once they start spending money, stopping it. One of the ways they save money on this thing is once they got caught with this, and it was reported, I don't remember if it's 60 Minutes or what, evidently they took away the pension from the two whistleblowers.
Nice. That was their reward.
Exactly. I'm sorry
See,
for interrupting you.
kids, summertime is coming, and trips with your parents. Raise your hand. Hey, mom, dad, we want to go to the Greenbrier Hotel. We want to learn, about what we saw on Gimbal's weekly market address. So that's just great. And so, Keith, you learned that. What else did you learn? Did you find your data that you were looking for?
I did. We bought a house in 1992. It was a new build on 106th and Hague Road in Fishers, and it had a basement and 4 bedrooms, and the whole cost was $132,000. The Bureau of Labor Statistics calculation for inflation said it should be worth $282,000. So just think in my mind, I paid 132 and it should be 282 today. That's inflation. The reality, when I went on Zillow, is it sold for 320,000. And that's all I'm saying. The language of numbers and time are hard a lot of times for our brains to understand what's actually happening, not even including the accelerated rate of inflation during times like right now.
That's good. That's good. Well, let's switch over to the markets, and one of the things, we addressed the debt ceiling a little bit already this morning, and one of the things that I love about the process of the stock market is just how efficient it can be looking at price and volume, and it's an efficient communicator to tell us daily what's going on. And so in real time, every day, Monday through Friday, 9:30 to 4, there are buyers and sellers arguing over price. And so when we talk about the stock market and what's happening, we're looking at a couple key drivers here. We're looking at price, and we're also looking at volume. For the most part, we all understand price, but volume, think of volume as this. If we could gauge and score the amount of buyers in one day or sellers in one day, that's the volume. It tells us the pace at which the market is being voted on. And so how many people are buying shares, how many people are selling shares, and the volume gives us a guide to what the big institutions are doing. Institutions like pension funds, mutual funds, endowments, the big money, where the big money is traveling. And so I've got a picture of the S&P 500 up, and overall, I think this is great. This looks very healthy. We're starting to see some battles for price, and we've been going sideways for a few weeks now. This is a weekly picture of the market, and that's not all bad. It's settled down, whereas beforehand, boy, we had that downward sloping trend line, and is pretty tough. By no means are we out of the woods yet, but this has been healthy to see over the past couple weeks. Do you have any other insights to the S&P, Keith?
Well, I have shared with you in the past the number of stocks trading below their moving averages, and we're still in one of those cautious areas where we have all three sections: the 200-day, the 50-day, and the 21-day moving average. More than half of those companies are trading below their moving average right now. The setup looks really good. That on this chart you're showing, Doug, that the green line that I put on there shows when it would have given you a time to be in the last couple, 3 years or so. And where there's no green line above it would have been a time that indicator would have suggested you move more money to the sidelines. We're still on this indicator on the sidelines, but we've tried to move a little in for folks should we get some buying to come in this market.
All right, let's switch gears and take a look at the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ's been stronger yet compared to the S&P 500. Again, this is a weekly, and if we go way back in time here to around Thanksgiving Day, 2021, that was our high watermark, and it turned over shortly after Black Friday, and it's been in a downward trend until here recently. And again, like Keith talked about, not out of the woods, but we're definitely showing some signs of strength, which has been really encouraging. Fighting for price over the last several weeks in the NASDAQ and big technology type stocks. And here in the last few weeks, we've seen positive above average volume coming in, which just tells us that NASDAQ stocks have been looking better than S&P 500 stocks. And I like to see a little difference between the two. When we're seeing the investors battle and say, well, we're thinking that growth could be moving ahead, the NASDAQ might favor. If it's something like a more classical style dividend type model, then maybe the S&P 500 will start to look a little better. But there's one in particular that has just not gotten any traction here recently, and this is the S&P 600 small cap stocks. I think you touched on this last week, Keith, but this downward trend here recently could even be affected by what we've been seeing in several of the bank stocks.
Yeah, there's definitely a weakness amongst smaller companies because of the bank stocks reflected in there, and there's also a liquidity issue that sometimes comes to the forefront during potential banking crisis. If you're a multi-billion-dollar mutual fund manager and you think you need to get some money available for liquidations and such, these small companies are really difficult to sell because they're not as liquid as some of those FANG stocks or things of that nature. And so when you're wanting cash to help with liquidations, there's just not enough of these shares where they could sell a significant amount of them to get money for their shareholders. And so any selling at all in some of these small companies can really drive those prices down pretty dramatically.
The poor banks, man, do you ever feel sorry for the banks? The poor banks out there. I hear they had, goodness, 0 interest rate to work with from what, 2008 or 9 until 2021. And so the banks, they really got caught on the wrong side of the tracks by buying cheap money, and all of a sudden that money has not become cheap, and your interest rates are paying more. They're demanding more. And so the smaller banks have had a tough time with that. And I think what we'll see is more pressure to go to the larger banks, and get some of those cheap money. And so the smaller banks have had a tough time with that. And I think what we'll see is more pressure to go to the larger banks, and get some of those cheap money. And so the smaller banks have had a tough time with that. And I think what we'll see is more pressure to go to the larger banks, unless something changes, unless something's lifted. And so the smaller banks are just having a tougher time. And that's been the trend of this week. That's been the trend really of this year. Okay.
It's a cultural thing too, I think, Doug, is that probably the last 30 or more years where you used to have the local hardware store that you knew the owner and you could go buy what you needed. Then we had the Home Depot and the Lowe's that came in, and those smaller places have been kind of weeded out. That's happening if you watch across most kind of places that you might have done business in the past. And the local bank is really, I think, an important component of our culture to help out those needs. But when we go to those kind of national brands, there's not really a lot of knowledge of the local person, and there's just a little bit harder time to regulate without regulations, if that makes sense. And part of that's happened, I think, with the regulations is that your character doesn't stand for your loan. It's just a score that's assigned to you. Your FICO score is assigned to you rather than somebody understanding your character. And that shifts the nature of even a community, I think, but that's a whole separate conversation.
Well, school is out for Caleb, and school is going to be out for the summer, coming up for several of you high school and middle school kids. And I was thinking, what advice would Gimbal Financial have for a young person today? And so for young people today, we've Keith's given you a picture of what inflation looks like, and who knows what it's going to look like during your lifetime. But one sure way to fight against it is to get a job. And so I just thought, I was thinking of the young people out there today, and I was thinking, man, what a great opportunity to go get a job this summer. And you can do this so many different ways, but in getting a job, yeah, you'll have the opportunity to make some money. You're going to increase your friends, your social influence. You're going to meet people who are like you, people who are not like you. You're going to meet people who like you and don't like you. You're going to learn to show up on time. You're going to learn the reward of having money in your pocket. And expanding your worldview can start with getting a job. For my early years, from like 6th grade, that's when I remember really starting to get into the lawn mowing business. And the most wonderful thing about mowing lawns back then is there wasn't a truck and a crew at everybody's driveway. Most people mowed their own lawns, and so it was the widows or the widowers who really needed some help, and young guys like me were willing to jump in and drag the mower behind our bicycles and help. And so you could be somebody underage, 12 years old, and getting paid. And that was a pretty cool thing, to be making some money. And so I just wanted to touch on finding a job, looking for a job out there, because without it, this will be your best friend in the summertime. And if you can get out there and be creative in how you might have a job, you can really help some people out. And one of those places that was brought to my attention recently was a concept. I think it's a concept. I don't know that it's an actual thing, but it's the term is sweaty startups. Have you heard about this, Keith?
I have not. I've done a few of those, whatever they are.
Yeah, you've done them. And a sweaty startup is, maybe you're the type where you're like, hey, you know what? I don't want any more social influence on my life. I don't want to hang out with people. I don't want to get a job where I'm making $15 for 40 hours. Maybe you're looking to make $600 in 3 hours. And so maybe that sweaty startup is you detailing cars. Summertime, people love their cars to look good, and maybe you're detailing cars. Maybe you're doing price arbitrage. You're getting some stuff and you're putting it on Facebook to sell. There's all different types of ways to do a sweaty startup. Walking a dog, uh, bathing a dog. I mean, there's so many cool ideas that you could do to make some money, to have influence, and to make the world a better place. And so that would be my advice for young people this summer is to go get a job and enjoy doing it, and you'll make some friends and make some money.
The dinner we had last night, I asked the successful business people with us, there were 3 of them besides myself, what advice they would offer Caleb as a 20-year-old. And one of the interesting ideas was, if you take some initiative and work hard, today may be the greatest opportunity for a young person to stand out by simply doing those things, taking some initiative and working hard. You will stand out head and shoulders above, and possibilities for you will be pretty unpredictable. I think they'll be very good if you'll take some initiative out there. So it's a cool time in history to be that person that's willing to stand out.
Yeah, it takes guts. It takes guts to put yourself out there, but the bar is awfully low. And so you could win some friends, influence people by getting after something that stokes your fire, and just going and doing it, regardless how old you are. And so that's good stuff. Well, Keith, you have a good weekend, unless there's anything else that you wanted to accomplish today.
There is. I want to add a vocabulary moment to the show today. This will be uncomfortable for some of you. The word is aberrant. It's a word that means departing from the usual and the natural. The usual and the natural. And as I was going to the restroom here in this establishment, they basically say that you can go in whichever one of these restrooms you identify with, regardless of your natural sex that you're born with. And I just think it's important to understand there is an aberrant behavior that you can have in a culture, and it creates problems no matter what somebody else thinks. And for example, we've had some aberrant, out of the ordinary behavior from the Federal Reserve in the last 15 years, where you mentioned that interest rates have been zero for a long period of time. And that aberrant behavior of the Federal Reserve has caused the problems that the banking industry has today. So even if somebody wants to tell you there isn't aberrant activity, there is, and it creates problems that others couldn't imagine. I probably wouldn't come to this establishment with my daughters because I wouldn't want them to use the restroom back there and some person come walking in because they identified themselves as a female. So no matter what somebody tells you, there is aberrant behaviors out there, and it happens not only in natural worlds, but it happens with financial and economic things as well. So that's just a thought for you guys to take with that vocabulary word of the week for you. Hey, let me show you one last thing. Go ahead, Doug.
I was going to say, with those aberrant behaviors, especially from the Federal Reserve, there can be leadership that comes out and makes this thing better. And that leadership probably is going to say, hey, let's reduce what we're spending, let's reduce what we're printing, and let's take it easy for a while, just like you guys would in your own financial plan. If you were going through a hard time, you would cut back and you'd get creative. And that type of creativity is what will work. That type of creativity is what's inside the American spirit.
Hey, Doug, can you let me share my screen real quick? I'll share this in closing.
Did that work?
Yeah, here we go. So if you want to go to the Greenbrier and you want to see some aberrant behavior, look at this. How do you like that combination of colors there?
Well,
you just got a little bit of everything going on.
Yeah, it's probably pretty fantastic. Makes me want to have some tea.
Exactly. Well, I hope you all have a spectacular weekend. It's good seeing you, Doug, and we are grateful to call you all friends.
Okay, guys, until next week.